after all of that, what we get is a really great conversation, though, in the car about the incredible, and Aaron brought this up offline, the cost of not even being a whistleblower until you are protected by the Whistleblower Protection Act, which is a whole lot of steps past all these people. Hey y'all, we're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Kristen.
And I'm Dr. Erin.
You are very welcome to our coverage of the penultimate episode of Hulu's limited series, The Dropout, talking about Elizabeth Holmes and et al. In this episode, which is called Heroes, and let me tell you, the opening song was perfect, because when we got to that line of "we can be heroes just for one day," I was like, yep, that is, yes, yep.
I know.
And that's double entendre there of the heroes of the whistleblowers, which is what a lot of this episode is about. Also, the heroes of the Wall Street Journal, John Carreyrou and his editorial and legal team that stood behind him. And then also Sunny and Elizabeth's perception of their own heroics. So lots of dynamics happening here. We will tackle the themes as I just described them, because that is what is going on. I want to say first up that there was some real impressive CGI in this episode, getting Amanda Seyfried into
I know.
that
sitting next
Charlie
to
Rose interview and
Papa
the Global
Joe.
Summit and Bill Clinton. Real
Bill
impressive
Clinton.
CGI.
I know. That I was impressed by that, because I was like, ooh, they did a good job.
And I had this moment of like, well, did they recreate it? And then I was like, no, because Bill Clinton looks like he's a crypt keeper right now. And that is like, he is not
Also,
aging
I
well.
think Papa Joe's a little busy, and that did look like a 15 years ago Papa Joe.
Well, it was before, like, when we were at the Global Summit, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, did they just get Clinton to do this? He's not doing anything else right now.
Yeah.
And then they panned and showed Madeleine Albright, and I was like, oh, no, this is CGI footage. This is CGI footage because Secretary Albright did not look well before her death. So
No.
I don't think that would happen. So really impressive. I also want to say that every single second Elizabeth and Sunny are together on screen and we are meant to believe they are in love. I am uncomfortable.
It just makes me feel icky. I don't like it.
makes
Like
me
every
feel
time
icky.
they come out, every time they're like at home, I'm just like, you're so weird. I don't understand you.
I don't care for this.
No.
So in terms of, let's talk about the whistleblowers. So we've got Tyler, who is trying to navigate a relationship with his grandfather. We've got Erica, who is being stalked at her new place of employment. And we've got Mark, right?
Yeah, Mark Rossler?
Mark Rossler, who is still inside Theranos at this point in time.
Yeah, he was the head of the lab at the time.
At the time, he is within this episode, he loses his job. And just a little fun fact: Sunny hires a fellow Southeast Indian Southeast Asian Indian person because he thought they would be trustworthy to run the lab. Unfortunately, the person he hired was a dermatologist and had absolutely no lab experience whatsoever. So interesting choice. But at this point, Mark Rossler had we opened the episode with Mark Rossler transferring around 200, nearly 300 personal emails to a hard drive so that he can get them to John Carreyrou. Unfortunately, the nanny state that is Theranos catches him. And what this all leads to is that when Mark goes to a lawyer and gets advice on what's going on, hears that Mark is up against David Boies, and the lawyer actually recommends that he delete all the emails and give up and go underground. John Carreyrou, of course, is not pleased with this, but after all of that, what we get is a really great conversation, though, in the car about the incredible, and Aaron brought this up offline, the cost of not even being a whistleblower until you are protected by the Whistleblower Protection Act, which is a whole lot of steps past all these people and what all these people are at, and they don't know. And you're only protected by the Whistleblower Act if the feds find, what you want. And they didn't go to the feds. They went to the journalists, and the journalists, all these kind of messes. They are getting stalked. They are getting sued. They are being made bankrupt. They are saying that they are in perjury for signing the NDAs. All of the power in this conversation is in Sonny and Elizabeth's hands. All of it. And speaking up to power is intimidating when there are low stakes, is nearly petrifying when everything is on the line. Your livelihood, your home, your reputation, everything, which we saw already with Ian. And we continue to see with less dire circumstances moving forward. But I really appreciate them following Mark and that scene in the car where he's calling John and saying, I can't do it anymore.
Yeah, I think for me, it struck me throughout the whole episode of, we often hear this story when big scandals get exposed. We often hear this narrative that, there's people out there that are like, oh, why didn't somebody say anything? Mm-hmm. Why didn't people do more? Why didn't people stop them? And we've talked a lot about this in specific reference to Larry Nassar and the abuse he perpetrated against some 500 gymnasts in the course of his career. And we've talked a lot about how it took so many of them and how it took so much evidence and how it took so much pressure to finally get a criminal investigation into Nassar. And then it wasn't even the charges of sexual abuse that got him. In the end, it was the child pornography that pushed the case over the line. So, we've talked a lot about this, and this was just another reminder for me that it's really flipping hard. It could destroy your whole life. It could bankrupt you. It could all the things you just said. And I'm so appreciative that they go into that detail in this, because it's not just the schadenfreude television of us watching, an evil person who lied. I'm not going to say evil. A person who lied and manipulated people and hurt people get their comeuppance. It's also about how flippin' hard it is to do that, especially when she holds all this power. When she's getting put on the Harvard Medical Review Board, when she's being given a global ambassadorship by the President of the United States. How do you confidently just say, I'm going to keep doing the right thing, even in the face of perjury charges and lawsuits and the flippin' endorsement of the President of the United States? It's remarkable what these people were allowed to do. And the second Mark Rossler deleted those emails, I was like, I get it, buddy. That's rough. That's rough. I get it.
And then I thought about, so Tyler Schultz was 22 when he did all of this.
Oh my God.
And I thought
22-year-old me would have caved so fast.
But I thought about the innate bravado. He is of such obscene privilege.
It's true.
That it comes, and he's not fully cooked mentally. So 28-year-old Tyler Schultz may not have done everything that 22-year-old Tyler Schultz did. And sometimes the invincibility complex of children really helps us here.
Yeah, especially white men of privilege, right?
Yep.
There's he's addressed that decisions.
Yeah, he's addressed that in some interviews that I've seen, where one of the reasons he felt so strongly he had to move forward is what he already, the fictional him, told us in an interview, is that he wasn't ever actually going to get destroyed, and he knew it.
Yeah.
He's still George Schultz's grandson. And so we see in this episode, though, the line he had to walk with his grandfather, flat out lying to his grandfather on several occasions, because he gave his grandfather a chance to listen. And when George stopped, that's it. So, accuracy cop here. I'll say that pretty much the way that meeting happened is the way it went down by all accounts. Tyler agreed to meet with his grandfather on the condition that there was no Theranos people present, including lawyers. So already Tyler felt betrayed when George brought in Michaela Watkins. But then Elizabeth had guaranteed George that it would be a one-page NDA and that would be it. So George felt incredibly betrayed by Elizabeth, that it was instead this giant pile of papers. In reality, Elizabeth punted that really quickly to Sonny, that was all Sonny's fault, so she could maintain the relationship with George. She did, in fact, later on call Rupert Murdoch to try to bury that story, and Rupert wouldn't take her call. Because evidently, it's just good to know that Rupert Murdoch had some ethics.
Had a line. Had a line somewhere.
Super glad to know.
I guess.
That he had some journalistic ethics, because it's not his place at all to bury a story as the owner of a paper. It's not his place. There is a complete firewall between opinion and news. And I will say, of all of the papers that still keep that, the Journal's is pretty strong. You can make a lot of arguments that the one between the Times is pretty porous.
Ooh, yeah.
But
Swiss cheese.
Yeah, I my perception, and from what I understand from some other people who know ethics better than I do, is that the one at the Journal is still pretty much intact. And they try to keep that pretty strongly because of all the business ties, which Rupert Murdoch, I don't know if he still owns a controlling stake in the Journal, but I believe he does.
Yeah, I don't know.
I subscribe, but I don't pay attention to the whole thing. So all of that is Tyler is still getting constantly bombarded with all of these documents. And this is, at this point in the journey, is when he realizes, thanks to grandmother Charlotte, who is one of the heroes of this journey,
right?
Realizes that he needs his own legal representation. So once again, a reminder, though, that as Aaron was talking about stakes, very publicly, Tyler and his family have said it cost them around $400,000 during the 18 months that Theranos was going after them. That is an incredible place of privilege that they could pay those bills. Yeah. It was not easy. There was definitely, and I read an interview with his parents that pretty much said some of the hardship was hiding it from their dad and hiding it from George, but also they didn't have $400,000 in cash laying around either, no matter how privileged they were, because most very wealthy people don't have that kind of cash. They have it in other assets, and you have to scramble to still do those things. It's still very difficult. So just because Tyler had that obscene privilege does not mean that this was not an emotionally fraught time for him. I don't want it to seem like we are saying, oh, it wasn't that hard for him because he had all this money. No. This was still very difficult and could have, even though he had the bravado to say it's probably not going to ruin me, still could have. There's a lot of people who don't care who George Schultz is. So it still could have, and he still continued to make this choice.
Yeah, and I think, that's such an important point to make, because I think he knew that he could probably survive it. And he's talked about that. And that's why he was able to take this risk. But we see the pressure it puts on Erica Chung. We see the pressure it puts on Mark Rossler. And Mark's not able to sustain it. He's moved out of his home. And the doctors in Arizona. Yeah. Like, what are you going to do if Sunny Balwani shows up and threatens your entire medical practice by saying he'll flood your website with bad reviews?
I mean, he seems terrifying. Like, all the reports are that he was even though he was shorter than a lot of people, like, he wasn't as tall as Naveen Andrews is, or is not, he's still alive, is not as tall as Naveen Andrews did. He was, like, I heard somebody describe him as a junkyard dog. Yeah. Like, his job was to scare you, and he did it very well.
Yeah. They're definitely leaning into that aspect of his personality, which I think, like, I don't think the show's obviously going to cover the trial. Maybe like Elizabeth's trial, I think they probably wrapped filming before then. I would love for them to do like an addendum, like an epilogue.
Remember that it's based on a podcast. So what I'm hoping is that the ABC News podcast covers the trial. And if we don't get the show, we at least get the podcast. So
yeah. Because I would just love to see, because they're certainly setting it up in this episode that she's going to throw Sunny under the bus, which we know.
Oh, she does.
We know that she does.
The quickest thing, yeah.
What amazed me about that conversation that she had with George Schultz towards the end of the episode, though, where he tells her not to listen to the wrong people, like Nixon and Reagan, which is hilarious, as if, like, Nixon didn't make choices and Reagan didn't make choices. But even after all that he's been told, he's still assuming she doesn't know what she's doing and that she's not making the decisions.
Yeah.
And to me, that was the ultimate, like, she's convinced all of them. She's hoodwinked all of them that she is this young, brilliant ingenue.
Yep.
Who does not know what she's doing and has trusted the wrong people. And I'm like, she's the CEO. She's making decisions. What, like, and that was the central theme for me of this, was the continued revelations that this is an example of the Emperor's New Clothes scenario, in that everyone believed her, and then more important people believed her, and then more important people believed her, because they were all afraid of being wrong and not believing her. And you made the point offline, which I think is a really great point, that, you know, she doesn't have scientists backing her. She has business people backing her. And one of the scariest phrases to business people is proprietary information. And so that would shut down a lot of possible inquiries into the science of what she's doing. But for me, that was the thing where I was just like, Obama named her a global ambassador. She's worth $4.5 billion. And, you know, it goes back to what Phyllis said in the previous episode about she's the right kind of feminist icon for all of these older men. She makes them feel good about themselves and where the world is going. She doesn't make them question how they might have contributed to issues of gender inequity or sexism or bias, because she's successful and she's doing something good for the world, and she's pretty and young and, you know, all the things that some of these other tech guys aren't necessarily. And so they can't be wrong about her, because then they're wrong about a lot of other things, and it would force them to actually look at their complicitness, I think, in perpetuating these biases. And so that's why they make her into this hero that they want her to be without ever verifying the science. And to me, like, I just kept shaking my head as they would tell me these things, and like the level, but it also explains in part how she gets to the level of hubris that she gets to.
Yep.
To where she actually called Rupert Murdoch and asked him to kill the story. Like, she gets to that level because she's got Bill Clinton shaking her hand. She's got, although the question Papa Joe asked her was pretty spot on, in that, you know, how was she able to convince people to give her money at 19? And I was like, that's an astute question, Joe Biden.
And Charlie Rose was grilling her. She was lying. That was a good, like, if she was willing to be honest, like, Charlie wasn't pulling punches. She was just lying.
No. Yeah, because I wrote down the question he asked her because it was so spot on. Has anybody challenged the science of what you do? So, you know, all of our problems with Charlie Rose aside,
he was a great interviewer.
Question.
Yeah.
It was a real intuitive question. And I mean, the answer we know is Phyllis Gardner. And what's your face guy from Mad Men? Kevin, yes. The lab guy for Walgreens. So yeah, those were the big things for me. I just kept shaking my head going, this is the power that, like, stories and fear and all of these things have over, you know, people with a lot of power. And I just, you know, as soon as they went from, like, all of this Obama stuff and she's worth so much money to, like, the Harvard Medical Review Board, I was like, oh, what even is this world?
Yeah.
I literally wrote the question, what does any of it matter if we can all be hoodwinked by a pretty face? I was like, what? It's fascinating and also infuriating at the same time.
Yeah, and that's, like, Phyllis's comment to her at Harvard. I loved that, is when this becomes a scandal, which it will become a scandal.
Yeah.
Are you aware that you've ruined this for the rest of us?
Yeah. What will happen to all the other women? Where will they go? Who is going to trust them? Yeah. And that's what you and I have been, you know, screaming into the void, and now our recording devices. Since we
found out about her, yeah.
Since we found out about this story. So you, for longer than even me, just like, as young women trying to pave our way through all the patriarchy and sexism and bias, it's so frustrating.
Because she kept saying all the things that we would say too, like, you're crazy until you're a genius. And, like, you know, she knew what she was doing, and she continues to know what she is doing. And, you know, I think we'll probably see in the next episode that, like, pretty much her first move in real life, her first move after getting indicted by the SEC was to break up with Sonny and kick him out of her house. Like, that was her first move. I'm like, oh, child, you are a class act. So So Sunny and Elizabeth, what I find really fascinating about them in this episode in terms of thematically is that I think it's pretty clear at this point that Sunny realizes the Emperor has no clothes on a level that Elizabeth doesn't. Like, Sunny realizes the tech is never going to work.
Yeah.
And he's just trying to stay alive as much as possible. I think Elizabeth is so deluded at this point, she still believes the tech will work.
Oh, interesting.
And that it doesn't matter. Like, one of the reasons that they need to keep lying and keep doing these things is also because it will work someday. I don't know if she's ever acknowledged that it was never going to work. And I think Sunny by this point realizes that it's never getting there. It's never going to be a finger stick.
As soon as he suggested, like, manipulating the tech in the Siemens machine.
Yeah, I don't think he ever saw that as a point in a journey. He saw that as the end of this. Yeah. And then my guess is that his hope was that they could do it, they could make a big enough song and dance routine, sell the company, and get out, is my guess. Yeah. I don't know him. Yeah. But because he does know how to sell companies. He did make a lot of money doing it. Although at some point in the book, John Carreyrou says no one's ever found any evidence of it. So the theory is, like, of the company. So there's two theories. One is that he paid someone to scrub the internet of it, which back in 2011 was a lot easier than it is now. And the other is that he embezzled the money, and it isn't really true.
Ooh,
so
spicy.
Realistically, like, looking at everything else, my guess is the first is that it was not a nice takeover, and he just he did not acquit himself well, and he paid for someone to scrub the internet.
Yeah, I would buy that more than it wasn't there in the first place.
Yeah, because you can't buy Lamborghinis on wishes and dreams. So
no, and he is the character that they've shown us in this show is somebody who is deeply insecure, and deeply conscious of his perception, other people's perception of him, and so if it was not a good relationship and it was not a good ending when he bought that company, he would want that out of there because he cares so much about what other people think of him.
And that's the thing, like, if you watch his face in the in the celebration scene of the herpes test that wasn't really a herpes test, that wasn't really an FDA victory, but they had to have a party anyway. Because that's one of the things that the show has kind of shown but hasn't really hammered. One of the ways that Elizabeth got so much loyalty is that every time something small happened, they threw massive parties. Yeah. Yeah. And that is one of the ways they engendered loyalty. But they're fighting.
It reminds me very much of the WeWork.
Yep. It's the same energy.
Retreats. Yeah.
It's the same energy. Ooh. So so we're in that scene, and Sunny is, like, very angry at her. And within 2 seconds, as soon as she goes up and she's announced, he's smiling and he's the hype man and he's everything. And so there was just something in me that went, oh, he knows this is never going to work. He knows that this is just a sham, and I don't know if she knows that yet. My other favorite Sunny and Elizabeth moment is when we're in the meeting with all the lawyers, and Elizabeth just very confidently says, like, we can still turn this around. Yeah. And in my notes in all caps, I went, you can turn this around by having science that works. Really simple to turn around if you had science that works. Since you don't have science that works, this is when you shut the company down.
Yeah. This is going to be a scandal, as Dr. Gardner told you. Yeah. I love that she said that, by the way, that she was like, don't call me Phyllis. I'm never Phyllis to you. I'm Dr. Gardner. I was like, yeah, bitch.
Yep. There's definitely people I pull that with when people will be like, and Kristen, I'm like, my name's actually Dr. Donnelly. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much. Yeah. But that was an interesting, I think, moment. And they're doing a really great job of showing the subtlety of their relationship, I think. In terms of moments that I hated, was when she was going through her wardrobe and it was all black. And then it was all black. And Sunny said that he laid out her clothes for her. And I was like, this is not good. This is not a good relationship, y'all. It's not good for either of you. It makes me icky. But I laughed at the wardrobe. Like, I love the way they're telling this story visually sometimes.
Yeah. So the final chunk of this story is John Carreyrou and his fictional editor, Judith. And Judith, his editor is not a black woman, by the way. But a lot of the stories that Judith tells and the dynamic between them is very the relationship he had with his male editor is very
white male editor.
And
Wall
he is
Street Journal.
very, very complimentary in his book about the necessity of the team behind him and around him and all of that.
You'd have to have a team behind you.
Like, and Ronan Farrow talks about that with how his reporting for Harvey Weinstein and Catch and Kill, like the amount of, whatever.
Yeah.
So his article's going to happen. He cannot get Theranos to answer questions. David Boyce, Elizabeth's response is just constantly, we can make this go away, which was utterly hilarious to me. It's the Wall Street Journal, you muppet. It's not Twitter. Like, you're not making the Wall Street Journal go away. And, like, this isn't the Des Moines Register. Like, you need to realize who you're dealing with. And so David Boyce goes into her office and says, this is when you tell me everything you've been hiding from me. And I was like, oh, no, she's not going to do that for another, like, solid 6 months, babe. But, like, good catch. And the thing is, like, in history, as soon as she tells him the truth, he quits. So, like,
really?
Yeah. Like, as soon as it all comes out, he quits. Because you can say a lot of things about David Boyce, but he's not unethical, and he's not unethical to this degree. He's still within the Bar Association ethics. He's not gonna do this. So
yeah, and you get that vibe with that big meeting, where her and Sonny are just telling him how it goes.
Yeah.
And how they want it to go. And he was like, oh, like the second he was like, whose the sources are? And I was like, oh, he's starting to pull that thread and it's gonna unravel. But yeah, I totally believe that, because you get that vibe from him in this, where he's like, as soon as he finds out that she's been lying this whole time, he's out of there. And I appreciated that they gave us the scene in the Wall Street Journal's, the negotiation scene.
Utterly perfect. And again, in that meeting was the two key revelations that they did use machines and that it wasn't all finger sticks. Once they got them on record of admitting that is in fact when the Journal felt comfortable running the story. Yeah. And it did run that night.
Yeah, it was, I love that they thought they were gonna get to John Carreyrou in that, and that he just sat there through the whole thing, and anytime
so why won't you answer my questions?
So then why won't you answer my questions? And I was like, yes.
It was. I was thinking of myself a couple times where, like, I've never, obviously tried to whistleblower, win a Pulitzer Prize for a giant thing, but I've been in some meetings where, like, the good cop, bad cop thing was working on me. Yeah. And I hope that the next time, and I was a lot younger, and so it worked on me, and I folded. In some situations, and now that I'm older, I hope I can bring that Carreyrou energy in and just keep saying, so why won't you answer my questions? Yeah. The story that his editor tells about La Montanza, the Sicilian fisherman. Why are we talking about Italy? We're not. We're talking about Sicily, which was just this like, delightful
Sicily.
little...
I was like, so accurate.
Such peak Italian energy.
It was so good. La Montanza. That was amazing. But she was like, bam, 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 bam. That was so good. So I was glad that we got that, though, because that's an important piece. I think clearly Linda, who's the lawyer for Theranos, the in-house lawyer, she is clearly struggling with this. I mean, they give us a scene where she's waiting in the bathroom to come ambush Tyler, and she, like, has to talk herself up to it. Yeah. The fact that they go into this meeting with the Wall Street Journal absolutely convinced that they'll be able to talk themselves around it and get caught up in actually forcing
journalism,
like journalism, and like underestimating that John Carreyrou and his editor might actually be good at their jobs, which I think a lot of people do with journalists and editors. So I appreciated that they stepped in it, and we got to see them step in it, because it just made me feel better.
Yeah, and I think I also wanted, for anyone who hasn't like read any books about big scandals in journalism, I want to clarify what on background means, because they don't in the show, and I'd like to bring that in. So on background is that, so going off the record means you can't even use the stories to verify anything. So people that are off the record, reporters can't, it's almost like you have to strike it from the record in being a juror. You can't mentally bring it in. people who agree to be on background will not be quoted, will not even be an anonymous source, but they will confirm or deny facts that have been gathered by other people. So they are a verification machine. Then you have I will be an anonymous source, and then you have I will go on the record. So there's the 4 levels of informants that journalists, especially in these big, huge things, try to handle. So I know a lot of people that have been background for several stories, some of which are huge and some of which are minor. But there was a big murder case here in Bucks County a couple years ago,
yes.
and which is now starting to get covered on true crime podcasts, which is surreal for me
because that was a crazy story, though.
They all keep mispronouncing Newtown. They keep saying Newton, and I'm like, the W is right there. It's right there. It's Newtown. Cosmo was in Newtown anyway.
Newtown. That's so funny that they keep saying Newton.
I don't
the one time
it.
I was driving across Northern Ireland, and we were listening to a BBC report on the radio, and they said, it was when the G6 or something.
Oh, yeah, in Fivemilton. In
Fivemilton. Yeah, so there's a town in Northern Ireland that is literally 5 Mile Town.
That's
5 Mile Town. That's the name. It's all one word, but that's the name of the town.
They used to have a really great cheese place.
They did used to have a really great cheese place. It's sad. But the reporter was like, live from Fivemilton. And I was like, oh, Lord. It's like Newton. No,
it's Newtown. But anyway, I have a couple friends that provided background for the Inquirer on, like, the culture of the different, socioeconomic spaces in Bucks County.
Yeah.
And, like, those kind of things. So, just to give you an understanding, Tyler at this point has no trouble talking to John and is probably willing to go, like, he will not be quoted, though. He won't go off the record. He'll help as he can, but he can't go forward. So in the preview for episode 8, we see Tyler saying, I am willing to now be a named source in this story. And so because it isn't just one article that brings down Theranos, it's a lot. They publish a lot. Once the floodgates open and people start quitting and they start getting more things, I think it's like after this is when Walgreens is like, are you kidding me? And people from Walgreens start going on the record. This is when this is when the public finds out about the failed Safeway deal. This is when it's like a deluge of stuff after this. It is never just one story that brings anybody down. It is always multiple, and we're going to start seeing those floodgates open. And I'm hoping we see the moment that Tyler has talked about. I'll say this in episode 8. I'm hoping we see the moment a lot that has come up in a lot of interviews, which is when George apologizes to him in front of the entire family. I hope we see that. Because it's a credit to George that when, he was hoodwinked, all of these things up to now, Elizabeth is a magician. But when faced with evidence, he didn't double down. He did admit wrongdoing. He did admit that he trusted the wrong person. And I really hope that we get that moment in the show.
I would like to see that because we talk about all the time the importance of, like, normalizing being wrong about things and admitting that you were wrong. And we live in a culture now where we have this false belief that alternative facts about things can exist. And so I think it will be nice, hopefully, to see that when a person is faced with the data, that they are capable of saying I was wrong. Because that's the question that Tyler asks him is, why can't you admit that you were wrong about her?
Yep.
And it's a hard thing to do. And so fair dues to George Schultz for being able to do it. So yeah, I agree with you. I hope we get to see it.
Other than that, my other hopes for the episode are that I don't need any more Richard Fuse. I'll be honest at this point now. Like, we need any more Richard Fuse. Would love a moment of Phyllis Gardner reading the article.
Yes. Come on.
Would love to see the moment that Elizabeth gets served with papers from the SEC.
Yep, please and thank you.
Would love to see the moment that Theranos goes bankrupt and dissolves.
I would love to see. I just want, like, a montage. I would love a montage of newspaper articles.
A montage of the consequences is also what I would love.
Yeah, a montage of the newspaper articles that are, like, all the revelations, and then the consequences. Theranos goes bankrupt. Theranos, SEC investigation turns into criminal charges. Like, I would just love to see, like, a deluge of those. Would be great.
Works for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm down. I would also like to see Ian Gibbons' widow, Rochelle, like read the article or be sitting, like, you know, a Shawshank Redemption ending where she's like sitting on a beach.
Yeah.
Finding peace. I don't know. I have no idea what happened to her. Or if she's been able to heal at all from what happened. But I would like to see that just for my own heart.
Totally fair. I don't know. The only thing I've ever seen with her is that she was on CBS Sunday Morning right when all the indictments came down and said that she blamed Elizabeth for Ian's death directly. Yeah. I've not seen anything since Elizabeth's convictions or anything else. I would imagine when Elizabeth's sentencing happens and we find out if she's going to jail, which a reminder to everybody, there's an actual conversation happening that she might not go to jail because she is a child, even though we still send mothers with young children to jail all the time, as long as they're not rich white women. So her sentencing is in September, scheduled for September. Erin and I are speaking to you in March. So watch this space. There will definitely be a Hottish Take update on this series at some point to discuss the real life implications of what has happened once Elizabeth's sentencing has happened, once we find out what's going with Sunny, Sunny's trial, all of those kind of things. So in the meantime, I think that's all I got on episode 7.
Yeah, I am done ranting at the Emperor's New Clothes story. So
amazing. If you liked this conversation, if you enjoyed or got anything out of it, please hit the thumbs up, because then YouTube will tell other people about it and we can invite others into this conversation. Our frequent call, if you have worked for Theranos, you know someone who did, you worked on this show, you have opinions, feel free to join us on screen and chat with us about those things. And we would love to talk to you about that and about your experiences. We talk about a lot of things to do with empathy and understanding and difficult conversations and trying to understand how Elizabeth and Sunny could do what they did outside of just base human greed has been one of our goals with this series, and we hope we are still holding it in tension, even though some things we do find a little weird and some of the motivations a little bit shallow. But our hope is that we've been able to humanize everybody who's a part of this story, and because that's our goal in all ways, to do it at all times. And our hope for you this week is that you are never ambushed at your grandparents' house with corporate lawyers.
I mean, it sounds simple, but is it really? I think that's a wonderful hope to send out into the world, and we'll see y'all for episode 8.
Bye, everybody.